An hour before the first hymn rang out, 72-year-old Eleanor Hartwell was physically shoved off the cathedral steps, barred from her own son's funeral and branded unstable. By sunset, police were cracking open his coffin. The widow was in handcuffs, and the world discovered why the family had been so desperate to keep a grieving mother outside the church. Hit that like button if you believe a mother's intuition is the strongest force in the world. Eleanor Hartwell arrived at St. Catherine's Cathedral at precisely 9 a.m., 90 minutes before her son's funeral was scheduled to begin. The morning air carried a chill that seemed to reach directly into her bones, though perhaps that was the grief. She wore a simple black dress, sensible shoes that had seen better days, and carried a leather handbag that contained only 3 items: her identification, a Bible with yellowed pages and handwritten notes in the margins, and a small velvet box. The cathedral loomed before her, grand and imposing with its Gothic spires reaching toward a cloud-heavy sky. Eleanor paused at the bottom of the stone steps, gathering herself. She hadn't been inside St. Catherine since David's confirmation, nearly 40 years ago. The memory of her beaming teenage son in his crisp suit rose unbidden, causing Eleanor to steady herself against the iron railing. "Ma'am, can I help you?" A young man in a dark suit approached her, clipboard in hand. His expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes held a glint of recognition. "I'm Eleanor Hartwell, David's mother. I've come for the service." Her voice emerged steadier than she expected. The man checked his clipboard with exaggerated care. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hartwell, but I need to check with the family. If you'll wait here." Eleanor nodded, watching as he spoke into a small radio clipped to his lapel. Within moments, the cathedral doors swung open, and a broad-shouldered man with silver-threaded hair emerged. Marcus Whitfield, Victoria's brother. Eleanor recognized him from the handful of holiday gatherings she'd attended before the estrangement. "Mrs. Hartwell," Marcus said, "I'm afraid there's been some miscommunication. Victoria has requested that you not attend today's service." Eleanor blinked slowly. "There must be a mistake. David is my son." "Was your son," Marcus corrected, "and Victoria has legal documentation, a restraining order, that prevents your attendance. You're classified as mentally unstable and a threat to the family's well-being." "There was never any restraining order. I've never threatened anyone in my life. The documentation exists. You can contest it through proper legal channels, but not today. Today is for the family." "I am family," Eleanor whispered. She withdrew a small photo album and opened it to a picture of herself holding newborn David. "See? This is the day he was born. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. He had a strawberry mark behind his left ear." 2 security guards materialized behind Marcus. "Please don't make this difficult," Marcus said, nodding toward the men. "I would never disrupt David's funeral, but I want you to tell Victoria something for me." She drew herself up to her full height, which still left her nearly a foot shorter than Marcus. "Tell her I know about James Kavanaugh." "I don't know what you're talking about. Please leave the premises, Mrs. Place Hartwell." As the security guards moved toward her, Eleanor turned and walked with dignity down the steps. She found a stone bench across from the cathedral, positioned beneath an ancient oak tree that provided a partial view through the stained glass windows. From here, she could see the altar and the closed casket that supposedly contained her son's body. The memory of her last conversation with David surfaced painfully as she sat watching mourners arrive. It had been 3 years ago, at David's sprawling colonial home in the suburbs. Eleanor had driven there unannounced, something she'd never done before. But the information she'd received from her former colleague at Memorial Hospital couldn't wait. "Mom, this isn't a good time," David had said. Behind him, Eleanor caught a glimpse of Victoria, arms crossed, watching from the staircase. "I need to speak with you privately," Eleanor had insisted. "It's important, David," he'd sighed. "What is it?" "It's about Victoria." Eleanor lowered her voice. "My friend Marge was working the ER night shift when Victoria came in. She was with a man, not you." They were. She'd struggled to find a delicate way to phrase it. "They were clearly intimate, David. The man's name is James Kavanaugh. He's a pharmaceutical investor. This has to stop, Mom. These delusions, these attempts to control my life by inventing stories about my wife." "David, I'm not inventing anything. Ask Marge. Enough." He'd raised his voice, something he'd never done to her before. "Victoria warned me you might do something like this. She said your jealousy of our relationship would eventually lead to these kinds of accusations." "My jealousy?" Eleanor had felt as though the ground beneath her was tilting. "David, I've only ever wanted your happiness." "Then prove it. Prove it by respecting my marriage and my wife. If you can't do that, then I think we need some distance." That distance had become a chasm. Phone calls went unanswered. Christmas cards returned unopened. Eleanor's one attempt to visit again had resulted in Victoria answering the door and coldly informing her that David wasn't available to deal with her issues. And now, 3 years later, Eleanor sat outside her son's funeral, barred from entry by the same woman who had stolen him from her. The cathedral bells began to toll, drawing Eleanor back to the present. More cars arrived, discharging somber-faced mourners in black. Eleanor recognized some of them, colleagues from David's pharmaceutical company, neighbors, a few of David's college friends. None of them noticed her sitting in the shadow of the oak tree. A sleek black limousine pulled up to the curb. The driver opened the rear door, and Victoria emerged, a vision in designer mourning attire. Her black dress hugged her figure, and a delicate veil obscured part of her face. She clutched a white handkerchief, occasionally dabbing at her eyes as she gracefully ascended the cathedral steps, supported by Marcus. From her bench, Eleanor observed Victoria's performance. The grieving widow act was polished to perfection, yet something about it rang hollow. Perhaps it was the way Victoria paused at the top of the steps, seemingly ensuring that all eyes were upon her. Or perhaps it was the brief, satisfied nod she exchanged with Marcus before entering the cathedral. As the service began, Eleanor remained on her bench, watching through the stained glass windows as best she could. The colored panes distorted the scene inside, but she could make out the casket positioned before the altar, the minister standing solemnly beside it, and Victoria in the front row, shoulders shaking with what appeared to be sobs. "Excuse me, ma'am. Are you all right?" Eleanor looked up to find an elderly man in overalls standing beside her bench. His weathered face was creased with concern. "Yes, thank you. I'm just observing." The man followed her gaze to the cathedral. "Ah, the Hartwell funeral. Sad business that. Young fellow, wasn't he? Heart attack, they said. Did you know my son? Your son?" The man studied her more carefully. "Can't say I knew him well. I'm Pete, the groundskeeper here and at the cemetery. Saw him a few times when he'd come to visit his grandfather's grave. Always left white roses, he did. Yes, his grandfather loved white roses. Funny thing, though, about the heart attack." "What do you mean?" "Well, I was trimming the hedges by the parish office last week when the doctor came to sign some papers. Young lady doctor, nervous type. Overheard her talking to that lawyer fellow, the widow's brother. She didn't seem convinced about the heart attack. Said something about missing tests and rushed certificates. Dr. Patricia Vance?" Pete nodded. "That's the one." Seemed mighty uncomfortable. Inside the cathedral, Victoria had risen to deliver a eulogy. Even from a distance, through colored glass, Eleanor could see her daughter-in-law's theatrical gestures and the handkerchief that rose periodically to her eyes. "What time did my son die? Do you know?" Paper said 3 in the morning. "At home. Widow found him." Pete shook his head. Strange time that. Dead of night. Eleanor's mind, still sharp despite her 72 years, began working. As a nurse for over 4 decades, she'd seen hundreds of deaths. Heart attacks in the early morning weren't uncommon. Blood pressure often spiked before dawn. But something about the precision of that time, 3 a.m., struck her as odd. Most people rounded to the nearest 5 minutes, especially in moments of panic. Her contemplation was interrupted by movement at the cathedral doors. A man exited hastily, phone pressed to his ear. Even from a distance, Eleanor recognized Jake Morrison, David's business partner. "It's done. The company is ours." A pause. "Yes, she's already announced the sale. No one suspects a thing." Another pause. "The documents are ironclad. By this time next week, the merger will be complete, and we'll be 50 million richer." Eleanor's blood ran cold. David had built his pharmaceutical company from nothing, specializing in affordable medications for autoimmune diseases. He'd often spoken of his refusal to sell, despite numerous lucrative offers, because he believed in the company's mission. Yet here was Jake, minutes after the funeral began, discussing a sale as though it had been planned for some time. Inside the cathedral, pallbearers were lifting the casket. Through the stained glass, Eleanor watched them move with surprising ease. Too much ease. In her 43 years as a nurse, Eleanor had helped move countless bodies. She knew the weight of death, the heft of a human form rendered inanimate. The pallbearers showed none of the strain that should have accompanied carrying a 6-foot, 190-pound man in a solid wood casket. "The coffin," she murmured. "It's too light." "What's that?" Pete asked. Before Eleanor could respond, she caught sight of Marcus exiting a side door of the cathedral, phone in hand. He walked briskly to a secluded corner of the churchyard, unaware of Eleanor's presence beneath the oak tree. "The sedative worked perfectly," he said into the phone. "No one will ever know he was conscious during the heart attack." The word struck Eleanor like a bolt of lightning. Conscious during the heart attack? Sedative? Her nursing mind immediately began connecting dots that should never have aligned. A precisely timed death at 3 a.m., a nervous doctor, a too light coffin. a business partner discussing a company sale that David would never have approved. And now, Marcus mentions a sedative and consciousness. As the funeral procession began to file out of the cathedral, Eleanor made a decision. She rose from the bench, her arthritis-stiffened joints protesting the sudden movement. "Thank you for sitting with me, Pete," she said. "I believe I need to speak with Father Miguel." "The priest? He'll be occupied with the burial procession." "That's all right," she said. "I'm more interested in what happens after the burial." The cemetery was located behind the cathedral, a peaceful expanse of rolling green dotted with headstones and mausoleums. Eleanor walked its perimeter, staying out of sight of the funeral party gathered around the open grave. From her vantage point behind a large oak tree, she could see Victoria standing at the graveside, still the picture of devastation. Dr. Patricia Vance stood some distance from the main group, her posture rigid, hands visibly trembling as she signed what appeared to be final paperwork presented by Marcus. The doctor's discomfort was palpable, even from a distance. As the casket was lowered into the ground, Eleanor noticed something strange. Old Pete, positioned near the cemetery equipment, was watching the proceedings with a furrowed brow. When the casket hit the bottom of the grave, his head tilted slightly, as though listening for something. The burial concluded with Victoria theatrically tossing a single white rose onto the casket. The mourners began to disperse, offering final condolences to the widow before making their way back to their vehicles. Eleanor waited until most had departed before approaching Pete, who was now preparing to fill in the grave. "Hollow," he said when he saw her. "That coffin sounded hollow when they lowered it. I've buried thousands. I know the sound of a body." A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air crept up Eleanor's spine. "Pete, where would they take someone if they didn't want them found? The Whitfield family has a private mausoleum on their estate. Old money, that family. Victoria's grandfather built it during Prohibition. Rumor has it there's tunnels underneath, used for running liquor back in the day." Eleanor nodded. "One more question. Is Father Miguel still inside the cathedral?" "Should be. He usually prays in the chapel after a service." "Thank you, Pete." Eleanor placed a hand on the man's withered arm. "You've been more helpful than you know." St. Catherine's was nearly empty when Eleanor re-entered, the echo of her footsteps bouncing off ancient stone walls. She found Father Miguel in the small side chapel, head bowed in prayer before a candle-lit altar. The priest was younger than most at St. Catherine's, perhaps in his early 40s, with kind eyes and a thoughtful demeanor. He looked up as Eleanor approached, recognition dawning on his face. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, rising to greet her. "I missed you at the service." "I wasn't permitted to attend," Eleanor replied simply. "Victoria and Marcus had security turn me away." Father Miguel's brow furrowed. "That doesn't sound right. You're David's mother." "Father, did David come to confession recently?" "I can't discuss the specifics of confession, Mrs. Hartwell. You know that. I'm not asking what he confessed. I'm asking if he came to see you." The priest nodded. "Yes, about 3 weeks ago. He seemed troubled." "Was he in good health?" "As far as I could tell. He was robust, clear-eyed." Eleanor chose her words carefully. "Father, I was a nurse for 43 years. I've seen hundreds of deaths, including many heart attacks. Something about David's death doesn't make sense." She explained what she had observed, the precise time of death, the light coffin, the business dealings already in motion, and most disturbingly, Marcus's phone conversation about sedatives and consciousness. Father Miguel listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly troubled. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "These are serious implications, Mrs. Hartwell." "I know," Eleanor's voice was steady, "but I need to see David's medical records. As his mother, I should have access, but Victoria will block me." "You do charity work with Memorial Hospital, don't you?" "I serve on their charity committee. We help patients who can't afford treatment. Then you have some access to their systems." "Please, Father, I need to know what happened to my son. Come with me to the parish office. I can make some calls." An hour later, Eleanor sat in the small parish office, reviewing David's medical records that Father Miguel had obtained through his hospital connections. "The death certificate was signed unusually quickly," she murmured. "And there's no toxicology report. Is that standard procedure?" Father Miguel asked. "No. For an unexpected death in a healthy 45-year-old man, toxicology is mandatory." Eleanor flipped through more pages. "And look at this. The attending physician was Dr. Vance, but there's no record of an ambulance call or emergency responders. Victoria supposedly found him at 3 a.m., called Dr. Vance directly instead of 911, and the doctor pronounced him dead on site. That does seem irregular." "It's more than irregular, Father. It's suspicious." Eleanor set the papers down. "And there's something else bothering me. The funeral announcement said David would be buried in St. Catherine's Cemetery, but Pete mentioned a private mausoleum on the Whitfield estate." Father Miguel frowned. "You're right. The burial permit is for our cemetery, but I clearly saw the hearse turn toward the Whitfield property after leaving the church grounds. Father, I believe my son might not be dead at all. The priest's eyes widened. Mrs. Hartwell, I know how it sounds, she interrupted gently. But consider, a too-light coffin, missing toxicology reports, a hasty death certificate, a company being sold immediately after the funeral, and Marcus's comment about sedatives and consciousness. What if they gave David something to simulate death? What if this entire funeral was staged? But why? What purpose would that serve? Control of his company, his life insurance, which I happen to know is substantial. David built a valuable pharmaceutical firm specializing in autoimmune medications. He always refused to sell, despite numerous offers. But with him dead, Victoria inherits everything. If, and this is a significant if, you're right, what do you intend to do? I need to find out where they've taken him. If David is alive, he may not have much time. As she moved toward the door, Father Miguel called after her. Mrs. Hartwell, wait, you shouldn't do this alone. It could be dangerous. I've been alone since they took my son from me 3 years ago. At least let me help. I have contacts in the diocese who might have information about the Whitfield estate. He reached for his phone. And I think we should speak with Dr. Vance. Eleanor considered this, then nodded. Thank you, Father, but we need to move quickly. If I'm right, every minute counts. Night had fallen by the time Eleanor left St. Catherine's, armed with the knowledge gleaned from David's medical records and a growing conviction that her son was in grave danger. Father Miguel had arranged a meeting with Dr. Patricia Vance for the following morning, a meeting the doctor had initially refused until the priest mentioned potential medical ethics violations. Eleanor checked into a modest hotel near the cathedral, unwilling to make the hour-long drive back to her apartment. Sleep eluded her as her mind raced through possibilities, calculating timelines and scenarios with the precision that had made her an excellent nurse. If David had been drugged to simulate death approximately 36 hours ago, and if he was being kept somewhere on the Whitfield estate, what was Victoria's endgame? The company sale was clearly one motive, but was that enough to stage an elaborate fake death? At 6 a.m., Eleanor rose and dressed, her movements deliberate despite her fatigue. She was applying lipstick, a small act of armor-donning, when her cell phone rang. Mrs. Hartwell? This is Father Miguel. His voice was tense. Dr. Vance canceled our meeting. She's leaving town today. Something about a family emergency. Where is she now? At her office, apparently packing up files. My contact at the hospital just called. I'm going there. Eleanor grabbed her purse. Can you meet me? I'll be there in 20 minutes. Memorial Hospital's professional building was quiet in the early morning hours. Eleanor found Dr. Vance's office on the 3rd floor. Inside, the young doctor was hastily filling a banker's box with files, her movements jerky and panicked. Dr. Vance, Eleanor said from the doorway. The doctor startled violently, dropping several folders. Papers scattered across the floor. Mrs. Hartwell, Dr. Vance's face was drained of color. I was just leaving town? Eleanor stepped into the office. That seems sudden. Family emergency? Dr. Vance mumbled. Eleanor knelt, picked up one of the papers. A bank statement showing a recent deposit of $250. Zero. That's private, Dr. Vance said sharply, snatching the statement. Is that what my son's life was worth? I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Eleanor's voice was calm. You signed a death certificate for a man who isn't dead. Mrs. Hartwell, you're confused. Grief can do that. My mind is perfectly clear. Eleanor fixed the younger woman with a steady gaze. You didn't conduct a toxicology screen. You didn't call the medical examiner, despite the sudden death of a healthy man. You pronounced him dead at the scene without proper examination. Those are serious accusations. They're facts, documented in the medical records. Eleanor softened her tone. Patricia, I was a nurse for 43 years. I've seen doctors make mistakes under pressure. I've seen them cover things up out of fear. But this is something else entirely. You don't understand. They threatened my daughter. Eleanor blinked, taken aback. Who threatened your daughter? Victoria and her brother. They have pictures of Emily, my daughter, entering her apartment building. They know her schedule, her habits. Dr. Vance's voice cracked. They said if I didn't cooperate, something would happen to her. Something unfortunate. The office door opened, and Father Miguel entered. He took in the scene with a quick glance. Dr. Vance, Mrs. Hartwell, is everything all right? No, Eleanor said. Nothing is all right. Dr. Vance was just explaining how Victoria and Marcus coerced her into falsifying David's death certificate. Then your suspicions were correct? Dr. Vance buried her face in her hands. God forgive me. I didn't know what they were planning at first. Victoria called me that night, frantic, saying David had collapsed. When I arrived, he was unconscious but alive, barely breathing, pulse thready. They had given him something. What did they give him? Eleanor asked. A paralytic agent combined with a powerful sedative. It simulates death, slows the heart rate to nearly undetectable levels, suppresses respiration, causes a drop in body temperature. Dr. Vance looked up, her eyes haunted. It's used in some medical procedures, but in higher doses. It can actually cause death, Eleanor finished. How long can someone survive in that state? 70, 2 hours, maximum, without medical intervention. After that, organ failure begins. Dr. Vance glanced at her watch. It's been nearly 40 hours already. Father Miguel placed a steadying hand on Eleanor's shoulder. Do you know where they took him? After I signed the certificate, they asked me to leave. But Victoria mentioned something about the preparation room and his accommodations for the next few days. The mausoleum, Eleanor said. They've taken him to the Whitfield family mausoleum. If that's true, we need to contact the authorities immediately, Father Miguel said. Dr. Vance shot to her feet. No, my daughter will be protected, Eleanor assured her. But we need proof before going to the police. They won't break into a private mausoleum on the word of a grieving mother they likely view as unstable. That's the narrative Victoria has been carefully constructing. What kind of proof? Father Miguel asked. Eleanor thought for a moment. Dr. Vance, do you have access to David's full medical history? Yes, of course. And the drugs they used, would they leave traces in his system? Metabolites that could be detected? Yes, for several days afterward. Good. Download his complete medical records and document everything you've told us. Eleanor turned to Father Miguel. We need to find someone who knows the layout of the Whitfield estate. And we need to locate David's friend Thomas. He was at the funeral, looking extremely uncomfortable. I can help with that, Father Miguel said. Thomas Ryan attends our parish. I have his contact information. Excellent. Eleanor turned back to Dr. Vance. Will you help us save my son? Yes, but I need to know my daughter will be safe. Father Miguel, can you arrange for someone trustworthy to watch over Dr. Vance's daughter? Perhaps someone from the church? I'll call Deacon Martinez. His wife Rosa is a retired detective. They can ensure Emily's safety. A plan was taking shape, but time was ticking away. If Dr. Vance was correct, they had barely 32 hours before David's condition would become irreversible. Thomas Ryan lived in a modest condominium across town. Eleanor and Father Miguel arrived to find him pacing in his living room, phone in hand. His eyes widened when he saw them at his door. Mrs. Hartwell? Father Miguel? Thomas ran a hand through his disheveled hair. What are you doing here? We need to talk about David, Eleanor said, and about what Victoria and Marcus have done. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Eleanor fixed him with the stern gaze that had once cowed recalcitrant patients. The young man's knees seemed to buckle. He collapsed onto his sofa, burying his face in his hands. How did you figure it out? A mother knows. Eleanor sat beside him. Thomas, I need you to tell me everything. I never thought it would go this far. Victoria said it was just insurance fraud. David would be dead on paper, collect the insurance, then resurface somewhere else with a new identity. They promised no one would get hurt. But that changed, Father Miguel prompted gently. Thomas nodded miserably. Once David was sedated, Victoria and Marcus revealed the real plan. They've constructed a special coffin with a limited air supply, about 48 hours worth. They buried him alive, Mrs. Hartwell. They're going to let him die for real, then retrieve and cremate the body to destroy evidence. Eleanor's blood ran cold, but her voice remained steady. Where is he, Thomas? In the Whitfield Mausoleum. There's a secret chamber beneath it, left over from Prohibition days. Victoria's grandfather was a rum runner, had tunnels built under the estate to move liquor during raids. And the coffin? How is it constructed? It's airtight except for a small oxygen release valve. The air inside will last approximately 48 hours from the time of sealing. He checked his watch, which means he has less than a day left. Why are they doing this? Father Miguel asked. It's David's company. He developed a breakthrough treatment for lupus that's worth billions. Victoria and Jake Morrison, David's business partner, have arranged to sell it to PharmaCorp. But David refused to sell because PharmaCorp would price it beyond most patients' reach. He swallowed hard. With David dead, Victoria inherits his controlling interest. The deal is already in motion. Eleanor processed this information with the clinical detachment she'd developed over decades of nursing. We need to get to that mausoleum. It's not that simple, Thomas said. There are security systems, guards, and even if we could get in, we'd need the access code for the hidden door to the underground chamber. Do you know the code? Father Miguel asked. Thomas shook his head. Only Victoria, Marcus, and Jake know it. Eleanor stood. Then we'll need to be creative. Thomas, are you willing to help us? Yes. What David did for me. His voice cracked. When I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, his company provided my medication at no cost. He's the best person I know, and I let this happen to him. You can make it right, Eleanor assured him, but we need to move quickly. Father, can you contact Detective Martinez? We could use professional assistance. I'll call her now, Father Miguel said. Eleanor turned back to Thomas. We need a blueprint of the mausoleum and tunnels. Do you know where we might find that? Actually, I do. Victoria had me scan the original blueprints for the renovation they did last year. I'm an architectural engineer. I have copies on my laptop. Good. Eleanor's mind was working with the precision and focus that had characterized her nursing career. We'll also need medical supplies. If David has been under sedation for this long, he'll need fluids, possibly oxygen. Thomas moved to his desk. I saved all the blueprint files, and I think I might know another way in. There's a maintenance entrance to the tunnel system that might bypass the main security. As Thomas pulled up the blueprints, Father Miguel returned. Rosa Martinez is on board. She's arranging for police assistance, but we need more concrete evidence before they can obtain a warrant for the Whitfield property. Evidence like this? Thomas turned his laptop to show them an email from Victoria. The message was explicitly clear, detailing the plan to sedate David and simulate his death. I saved everything. I was going to go to the police tomorrow if I couldn't live with myself any longer. Why wait until tomorrow? Eleanor asked. Because that's when Victoria and Marcus are flying to the Cayman Islands. I thought it would be safer to move once they were gone. Thomas looked down. I was being a coward. You're making the right choice now, Father Miguel said. Eleanor studied the blueprints on Thomas's screen. According to this, there's a network of tunnels connecting the mausoleum to the main house and a boathouse on the property's edge. The chamber where David is being held appears to be here, beneath the central chamber of the mausoleum. That's right, Thomas confirmed. The original chamber was used to store illegal alcohol during Prohibition, and now it's being used as a murder chamber, Eleanor said grimly. Thomas, can you print these blueprints? And the emails? As Thomas gathered the evidence, Father Miguel's phone rang. Rosa Martinez is on her way with her husband. She says we need to document everything and build an airtight case before approaching the prosecutor for a warrant. Eleanor checked her watch. David has less than 24 hours of air left. We don't have time for bureaucracy. We can't just break into the Whitfield estate, Father Miguel cautioned. Then we don't break in, Eleanor said. We get invited. Thomas and Father Miguel exchanged confused glances. Victoria doesn't know that we suspect anything, Eleanor explained. To her, I'm just the unstable mother who was banned from the funeral. What if I play that role? What if I appear at her door, emotional and demanding to see David's body to say goodbye? She'd never allow it, Thomas said. Perhaps not, but it would get us onto the property, distract her and any security, while others locate the maintenance entrance to the tunnels. Father Miguel looked uncertain. It's risky, Mrs. Hartwell. My son is running out of air, Eleanor said firmly. Rosa and Deacon Martinez arrived 30 minutes later. The retired detective was a formidable woman in her 60s. She reviewed the evidence Thomas had compiled, then made several calls to former colleagues. Here's where we stand, she said after hanging up. The evidence is compelling but circumstantial. The emails don't explicitly mention murder, just fraud. Without physical evidence of David being alive and held against his will, no judge will issue a warrant for the Whitfield estate. Then we proceed with my plan, Eleanor said. Rosa frowned. That's dangerous, Mrs. Hartwell. Victoria and Marcus have already demonstrated they're willing to commit murder. I'm 72 years old, Detective. I've lived my life, but my son is only 45, with decades ahead of him. Eleanor's voice was steel. The detective nodded. All right, but we do this my way. Controlled, coordinated, and with backup plans. Over the next hour, they developed a strategy. Eleanor would arrive at the Whitfield estate ostensibly to collect David's personal effects. Meanwhile, Thomas would guide Rosa and her husband to the maintenance entrance of the tunnel system, using the blueprints as a guide. Father Miguel would remain in contact with Dr. Vance, who was preparing medical supplies they might need once David was found. The priest would also serve as their communication hub, ensuring everyone remained coordinated. One more thing, Rosa said. We need to document everything. Evidence gathered illegally won't hold up in court. She produced small body cameras for each of them. These will record video and audio. No matter what happens, keep them running. As they filed out of Thomas's condominium, Eleanor found herself in step with the retired detective. You know, Rosa said quietly, in my 30 years on the force, I learned to trust a mother's instincts. They're rarely wrong. Let's hope mine aren't wrong now. The Whitfield estate sprawled across 20 acres of prime real estate overlooking the city. A wrought iron gate blocked the long driveway, with a security keypad mounted on a stone pillar. Eleanor pulled her modest sedan to the gate and pressed the intercom button. Whitfield residence? A male voice answered. This is Eleanor Hartwell, David's mother. I'm here to collect his personal effects. One moment, please. Eleanor waited, heart pounding despite her outwardly calm demeanor. The tiny camera pinned to her blouse captured everything. The intercom crackled again. Mrs. Hartwell, Mrs. Whitfield is not receiving visitors at this time. Please contact her attorney to arrange for collection of any personal items. I've driven an hour to get here, Eleanor said. Surely she can spare 5 minutes for the mother of her deceased husband. Another, longer pause. Then the gates began to swing open. Proceed to the main house. Security will meet you. Eleanor drove slowly up the winding driveway, taking note of security cameras mounted on trees and light posts. The main house came into view, a sprawling Georgian mansion with manicured gardens and a circular drive. As instructed, she parked near the front entrance. A security guard emerged from the house, his expression impassive. Mrs. Hartwell, please follow me. Eleanor was led through an opulent foyer into a formal sitting room, where Victoria sat perched on a white sofa still dressed in black. Eleanor, Victoria said, this is unexpected. I apologize for the intrusion, Eleanor replied. I needed to collect some of David's things, perhaps photographs from his childhood, or the watch his father gave him. Those items are now mine, legally, but I suppose I could part with a few photographs. She snapped her fingers at the security guard. Tell Marta to bring down the photo albums from the study. Would you like some tea? Victoria finally offered. No, thank you. Eleanor glanced around the room, noting the absence of any photos of David. I was hoping I might be able to say a proper goodbye. At the mausoleum, perhaps. That won't be possible. The mausoleum is sealed. Surely it can be unsealed, Eleanor pressed. The dead don't care about goodbyes, Eleanor. Victoria's voice had hardened. Are you certain he's gone, Victoria? What are you implying? Nothing, Eleanor backpedaled. Grief makes us say strange things, doesn't it? It's just that. I keep feeling like he's still here, somehow. That's a common feeling after losing someone. The mind plays tricks. She checked her diamond-encrusted watch. I have a meeting with the company board in an hour. Marta should be here with those albums soon. Meanwhile, at the far edge of the Whitfield property, Thomas was leading Rosa and Deacon Martinez through a densely wooded area. The maintenance entrance should be just ahead, Thomas whispered. It was disguised as a storm shelter during Prohibition. Rosa nodded. There. She pointed to a slight depression in the ground, partially hidden by overgrown shrubbery. This is it. Is it alarmed? Rosa asked. Shouldn't be. According to the renovation plans, they focused on securing the mausoleum entrance, not these peripheral access points. Deacon Martinez, a sturdy man with a salt and pepper beard, stepped forward with a crowbar. Stand back. With a grunt, he wedged the crowbar into the seam of the door and pulled. The aged metal groaned, then gave way, revealing a dark passage leading into the earth. Rosa clicked on a powerful flashlight. Let's move. Remember, we're looking for the chamber beneath the central mausoleum. As they descended into the darkness, Father Miguel received a text from Dr. Vance. Medical supplies ready, standing by at St. Catherine's. Back in the Whitfield mansion, Eleanor was flipping through a photo album that the housekeeper had delivered. It contained pictures of David's college years and early career, none from his childhood, which Victoria would not have possessed. These are lovely, Eleanor said, but I was hoping for earlier photos. Perhaps from his childhood. Those would have been at his office, Victoria said. And those items have already been packed away. Eleanor noticed a framed photograph on a side table that hadn't been visible from her seat. It showed Victoria with a man who was decidedly not David. She recognized him immediately. James Kavanaugh, the pharmaceutical investor she had caught Victoria with 3 years ago. Victoria followed her gaze and smoothly rose to move the photograph to a drawer. A colleague, she said. Of course, Eleanor murmured. She glanced at her watch, wondering how Thomas and the Martinezes were progressing. She needed to keep Victoria distracted for at least another 20 minutes. Victoria, she said carefully, I know we've had our differences, but I'd like to understand what happened that night. When he had his heart attack. It was sudden. We'd gone to bed around 11. I woke up at 3 to find him gasping for breath. By the time Dr. Vance arrived, he was gone. The precision of that time again, 3. Eleanor noted it but pressed on. That must have been terrifying for you. And you called Dr. Vance directly? Not emergency services? Dr. Vance is a family friend. She lives nearby. I see. And David had no symptoms beforehand? No chest pain? Shortness of breath? None that he mentioned. Victoria stood abruptly. I don't see the point of rehashing this painful event. The albums are yours to take. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for my meeting. Eleanor rose as well, reluctantly. She hadn't been able to maintain the distraction as long as planned. As she was being escorted to the door by the security guard, Eleanor caught sight of Marcus entering through a side door, his expression urgent. He spotted her and froze momentarily before hurrying toward Victoria in the sitting room. Through the open doorway, Eleanor heard fragments of their hurried conversation. Security alert at the east perimeter. Check the tunnels immediately. Might know something. Her heart raced. Thomas and the Martinezes must have triggered some kind of alarm. She needed to create another distraction, and quickly, taking a deep breath, Eleanor staggered suddenly, clutching her chest. "Oh," she gasped, leaning heavily against the wall. "My heart." The security guard turned, startled. "Ma'am, my medication, in my purse." Victoria and Marcus appeared in the doorway, their faces showing more annoyance than concern. "What now?" Victoria snapped. "She says it's her heart," the guard explained. "Oh, for God's sake," Victoria muttered. "Call an ambulance if you must, but get her out of here." Marcus studied Eleanor with suspicious eyes. "This is very convenient timing, Mrs. Hartwell." Eleanor clutched her chest more dramatically. "Water, please." The security guard looked to Victoria, who rolled her eyes and nodded. As he hurried toward the kitchen, Marcus knelt beside Eleanor. "What do you know?" he hissed. "I know about the paralytic agent. I know about the air supply running out. I know everything, Marcus." "That's impossible." "Is it?" "Dr. Vance has a conscience. It seems, and Thomas Ryan has kept quite detailed records." "We have a problem," he said to Victoria, his voice tight. Victoria stepped closer. "What is she talking about?" "She knows," Marcus said. "About David." "That's not possible." "Apparently, your doctor friend and Thomas have been talking." Marcus glanced at his phone, which was buzzing insistently. "And we have a security breach at the east maintenance entrance." Victoria's face hardened. "Lock her in the study. I'll deal with her later." She turned to Marcus. "Secure the mausoleum. Now." Deep beneath the Whitfield estate, Thomas led Rosa and Deacon through narrow tunnels that smelled of damp earth and forgotten secrets. Their flashlight beams cut through darkness that seemed to have physical weight, revealing brick walls glistening with moisture and occasional rusted sconces that once held torches. "According to the blueprints, we should be approaching the area beneath the mausoleum," Thomas whispered. The signal was weak this far underground, but the downloaded plans were still accessible. There should be a junction ahead, with the main tunnel continuing toward the house and a smaller passage leading up to the mausoleum chamber. Rosa moved with a cautious precision. "Any idea what kind of security we're dealing with once we reach the chamber?" "The renovation plans mentioned electronic locks requiring access codes," Thomas replied. "But I don't know if there are cameras or motion sensors." "We'll proceed assuming there are," Rosa decided. "Deacon, you take the rear. Thomas, stay between us." They moved forward until they reached the junction Thomas had described. The main tunnel continued straight ahead, while a narrower passage branched off to the right, leading to a set of steep stone steps. "That's our route," Thomas indicated the steps. "They lead up to a trapdoor that opens into the floor of the mausoleum's lower chamber." Rosa hesitated. "Do you hear that?" A faint electronic beeping echoed down the narrow passage. "Sounds like an alarm," Deacon murmured. "We've been detected," Rosa concluded. "We need to move quickly." They hurried up the stone steps, emerging into a small antechamber with a modern steel door incongruously embedded in one wall. The source of the beeping was a security panel beside the door, its screen flashing red. "Can you bypass it?" Rosa asked Thomas. He examined the panel. "It's a standard SecureTech system. I might be able to." His words were cut short by the sound of a door slamming somewhere above them, followed by footsteps. "Someone's coming," Deacon warned. Rosa made a quick decision. "Hide. We'll take them by surprise." They extinguished their flashlights and pressed themselves against the walls of the antechamber, disappearing into shadows as the footsteps grew louder. A beam of light preceded the newcomer, a security guard descending a different set of stairs than the ones they had used. He approached the security panel, muttering under his breath as he punched in a code. Rosa nodded to Deacon, who moved with surprising stealth for his size. In one fluid motion, he wrapped an arm around the guard from behind, covering his mouth to prevent any outcry. "We don't want to hurt you," Rosa said. "We're investigating a kidnapping and attempted murder. Cooperate, and you'll face no charges." The guard's eyes widened above Deacon's restraining hand. After a moment, he nodded slightly. "Good," Rosa continued. "Is there anyone else coming down here?" The guard shook his head. "Is there someone being held behind that door?" A hesitation, then a reluctant nod. "What's the access code?" When Deacon cautiously removed his hand, the guard spoke in a whisper. "Look, I just work security. They told me it was a panic room, for the family's protection. I didn't know they were keeping someone prisoner." "The code," Rosa repeated firmly. 847236, the guard supplied. "But listen, if Ms. Whitfield finds out I gave you that—" "She won't," Rosa assured him. "We'll say we forced it out of you. Now, sit down against that wall. Deacon will keep you company while we check inside." As Deacon secured the guard with plastic zip ties, Thomas entered the code into the panel. The beeping stopped, replaced by a soft click as the door unlocked. "Ready?" Rosa asked, drawing a small pistol from her jacket pocket, her retired service weapon, which she was still licensed to carry. Thomas nodded nervously. Rosa pushed the door open, revealing a chamber about 15 feet square. The walls were lined with steel panels, and the floor was smooth concrete. In the center of the room sat a modified coffin, a sleek, modern construction with a small digital display on one side showing a countdown timer. 16, 42, 16, 42, 16, 42. "Oh my God," Thomas breathed. "That's how much air he has left." Rosa holstered her weapon and hurried to the coffin. "We need to get this open." Thomas circled the coffin, examining it with growing horror. It's sealed electronically. There should be a control panel. Here. He located a small touchscreen on the head of the coffin. "It needs another code." The guard spoke up from his position against the wall. "I don't know that one. Only Ms. Whitfield and her brother have it." Rosa pulled out her phone. "No signal down here. Deacon, go back to the entrance and call Father Miguel. Tell him we found David but need Dr. Vance's help to safely open the coffin." As Deacon hurried away, Thomas continued examining the coffin. "This is sophisticated equipment," he murmured. "Medical grade. The air supply is regulated through this valve, and there appears to be a sedative delivery system here. Can we break it open?" Rosa asked. "Not safely. The seals are designed to be tamper-proof. If we force it, we could compromise the air supply instantly. Then we wait for Dr. Vance and hope she knows how to override it." Meanwhile, in the Whitfield mansion, Eleanor found herself locked in a wood-paneled study. The security guard posted outside the door. Her heart attack had been dismissed once Marcus realized she was faking, and now she was effectively a prisoner. The study was luxurious but functional, with built-in bookshelves, a massive desk, and several leather chairs. Eleanor immediately began searching for anything that might help her escape or communicate with the others. The desk drawers were locked, and there was no phone in the room. The windows, while large, overlooked a sheer drop of at least 20 feet to a stone patio below. Eleanor removed the small camera Rosa had given her and examined it. The recording light was still on, but she had no way to transmit the footage. She pinned it back to her blouse and continued searching. On a sideboard, she found a decanter of what appeared to be whiskey and several crystal glasses. Next to them stood a small silver frame containing a photograph of Victoria with an elderly man, presumably her grandfather, the rum runner who had built the tunnel system. Eleanor picked up the frame, studying it. The photograph had been taken in front of the mausoleum, its neoclassical facade visible in the background. Something about the image tugged at her memory, a detail just out of reach. She was still pondering the photograph when the study door opened. Victoria entered, followed by a man Eleanor recognized with a jolt. "James Kavanaugh, the pharmaceutical investor." "Mrs. Hartwell," Kavanaugh said smoothly. "What an unexpected pleasure." Eleanor set down the photograph carefully. "Mr. Kavanaugh, I see you've moved from affair partner to business partner rather quickly." Victoria's perfect features twisted with irritation. "Always so judgmental, Eleanor. It's no wonder David cut you out of his life." "David cut me out because you lied to him," Eleanor replied. "You told him I was trying to control his life, when in reality, I was trying to warn him about your infidelity." "Details." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "The important thing is that it worked, and now, here we are." "Yes, here we are. With you having drugged your husband, faked his death, and buried him alive." Eleanor held Victoria's gaze. "Why go to such elaborate lengths? Why not simply divorce him?" Kavanaugh answered. "Divorce would have entitled David to half of everything, including his company. This way, Victoria inherits it all. Plus the life insurance," Victoria added, $12 million, tax-free. "And I suppose PharmaCorp is paying a premium for David's lupus treatment?" Eleanor asked. "You are remarkably well informed for someone who's been out of David's life for 3 years. A mother never stops paying attention," Eleanor replied. "David developed that treatment to help people, not to generate obscene profits. He refused to sell to PharmaCorp because he knew they would price it beyond the reach of most patients. That's business," Kavanaugh shrugged. "Sentimentality has no place in pharmaceuticals, and I suppose sentimentality has no place in marriage either," Eleanor asked Victoria pointedly. Victoria laughed, the sound brittle and hollow. "Marriage is a contract, Eleanor. David fulfilled his usefulness. Now it's time to cash out." "You won't get away with this," Eleanor said. "Dr. Vance has already provided evidence of her coercion. Thomas Ryan has turned over emails detailing your plans." "Evidence of what, exactly? Insurance fraud? Perhaps. But murder. David's not dead yet, and you have no proof he's being held against his will." "My colleagues are in the tunnels beneath the mausoleum right now," Eleanor said. Marcus is handling that situation, Victoria said dismissively. And even if they do find the panic room, they can't access it without codes that only we possess. You're going to let him suffocate, Eleanor said. Your own husband. Former husband, technically, Victoria corrected. Death does part us after all. You've done this before, haven't you? Eleanor asked suddenly. Your first husband, the one who died so tragically young of a brain aneurysm. You did the same thing to him. You can't prove that. Perhaps not. But I suspect the authorities will be very interested in exhuming his body once they learn about David. Enough talk. James, call Marcus and find out what's happening at the mausoleum. I'll deal with Mother Hartwell. As Kavanaugh stepped out to make the call, Victoria approached Eleanor with measured steps. You know, I almost admire your persistence. It's a pity David didn't inherit your backbone. He inherited my heart, Eleanor replied. Victoria's laugh was genuine this time. She reached into her pocket and withdrew a small syringe. Do you know what this is, Eleanor? Being a nurse, you might recognize it. The same paralytic agent you used on David, I presume. Very good. A fast-acting neuromuscular blocker. It paralyzes the respiratory system within seconds. Victoria tapped the syringe thoughtfully. In your case, given your age, I imagine it will look like a natural heart attack. Grief-stricken mother succumbs after son's funeral. So poetic. If you kill me, you'll never get the access codes for the coffin, Eleanor bluffed. Victoria paused. What are you talking about? Dr. Vance changed the emergency override codes this morning. Eleanor improvised. She gave them only to me, as insurance. If anything happens to me, David's coffin seals permanently. It was a desperate lie, but Eleanor could see Victoria wavering, calculating the risks. Kavanaugh burst back into the room. We have a problem. Marcus has been arrested by police at the mausoleum entrance, and there's a news van pulling up the driveway. Victoria whirled toward him. What? How is that possible? It seems your Dr. Vance went to the district attorney with evidence. They've obtained an emergency warrant. Eleanor smiled. As I said, it's over, Victoria. Victoria's face contorted with fury. She lunged at Eleanor with the syringe, but years of nursing had given the older woman faster reflexes than Victoria anticipated. Eleanor sidestepped, causing Victoria to stumble into the desk. The syringe clattered to the floor, rolling under a bookcase. Kavanaugh grabbed Victoria's arm. We need to go. Now. The jet is fueled and waiting. Victoria hesitated. The codes. Forget them, Kavanaugh urged. A commotion erupted in the hallway outside. Voices shouting. Heavy footsteps. The security guard's voice rose in protest, then fell silent. The study door burst open, revealing Detective Rosa Martinez, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers. Victoria Whitfield, James Kavanaugh, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and unlawful imprisonment. Victoria's perfect mask finally shattered completely. With a shriek of rage, she lunged toward the desk, yanking open a drawer Eleanor had found locked. Her hand emerged with a small pistol. Victoria, don't! Kavanaugh shouted, but it was too late. Victoria raised the gun, aiming at Eleanor. This is all your fault, you interfering old woman. The gunshot was deafening in the confines of the study. Eleanor flinched, but the bullet never found its mark. Rosa had tackled Victoria from the side, sending the shot wide into a bookshelf. The 2 women crashed to the floor, Rosa pinning Victoria with practiced efficiency despite their age difference. As the officers handcuffed a still struggling Victoria and a resigned Kavanaugh, Rosa helped Eleanor to her feet. Are you all right, Mrs. Hartwell? Eleanor nodded. David, have you found him? Yes, Rosa confirmed. Thomas and Dr. Vance are with him now. The coffin's air supply was down to less than 17 hours. Another day. And, is he conscious? Eleanor asked. Semi-conscious. The sedatives are still in his system, and he's dehydrated. But Dr. Vance believes he'll make a full recovery. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. Thank God. Can you take me to him? As they led her from the study, Victoria's venomous voice followed them. He never loved you, Eleanor. He told me himself. You were nothing but a burden to him. Eleanor paused in the doorway, turning to face her daughter-in-law one last time. Love isn't about what you say in your worst moments, Victoria. It's about what you do in someone's darkest hour. She straightened her shoulders. And in David's darkest hour, I came for him. Can you say the same? Victoria had no answer, her beautiful face ugly with thwarted rage as the officers led her away. The journey to the mausoleum took them across manicured grounds that seemed grotesquely peaceful given the horror hidden beneath. Police and emergency vehicles lined the circular drive in front of the neoclassical structure, their lights painting the white marble in alternating red and blue. Father Miguel met them at the entrance, his face drawn with concern that melted into relief at the sight of Eleanor. Thank God you're safe. Victoria? Arrested. Rosa confirmed. Along with Kavanaugh. Marcus is already in custody. And Jake Morrison? Eleanor asked. Picked up at the airport 20 minutes ago, Father Miguel reported. He was attempting to board a flight to Buenos Aires. They descended into the mausoleum, past the ornate family crypts, and through the hidden door that led to the underground chamber. The air grew cooler and damper as they moved deeper beneath the earth, the modern lighting installed during renovations casting harsh shadows on the ancient brick walls. Finally, they reached the steel door of the panic room, now standing open. Inside, medical personnel hovered around the coffin, which had been unsealed. Dr. Vance was administering an IV to a pale figure lying on a gurney. David. Eleanor rushed forward. David! Dr. Vance looked up, stepping aside. He's stable but weak. The paralytic has mostly worn off, but the sedatives are still in his system. Eleanor reached her son's side, taking his limp hand in hers. His face was gaunt, his breathing shallow but steady. An oxygen mask covered his nose and mouth, and multiple IV lines ran into his arms. David, she whispered, it's Mom. You're safe now. His eyelids flickered, then slowly opened. His gaze was unfocused at first, then gradually sharpened as he registered her presence. He tried to speak, but the oxygen mask muffled his words. Don't try to talk, Eleanor soothed. Just rest. We're taking you to the hospital. David's eyes held hers, and he managed to squeeze her hand weakly. The message in that simple gesture was clear enough. Thank you. I'm sorry. I love you. Eleanor felt tears spill down her cheeks. I knew you weren't gone. As the medical team prepared to move David to the ambulance, Rosa approached Eleanor. We'll need statements from both of you, but that can wait until he's stronger. Eleanor nodded. What happens now? With Victoria and the others? They'll be charged with attempted murder, insurance fraud, and conspiracy at minimum, Rosa replied. The evidence is overwhelming. Between Dr. Vance's testimony, Thomas's emails, and the footage from our body cameras, and David's company, the sale to PharmaCorp is already being investigated by the SEC. With the principals under arrest for attempted murder, I imagine the deal will collapse. None of that matters right now, she said quietly. All that matters is that he's alive. Father Miguel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You never gave up on him, Mrs. Hartwell. Your faith saved his life. Not faith, Eleanor corrected. Love. A mother's love doesn't recognize estrangement or time or distance. It simply persists. As they followed the stretcher up from the underground chamber, emerging into the sunlight that now seemed miraculous in its ordinary beauty, Eleanor felt a weight lifting from her heart. The journey wasn't over. David's recovery would take time, as would rebuilding their relationship. But they had been given a second chance, and she intended to make the most of it. The image of Victoria being led away in handcuffs flashed in her mind. The younger woman's perfect facade had finally crumbled, revealing the cold, calculating person beneath. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in Victoria's downfall, only relief that her poisonous influence had been removed from David's life before it was too late. As the ambulance doors closed with David safely inside, Eleanor turned to Father Miguel. I'd like to ride with him to the hospital, if that's possible. The priest nodded. Of course, I'll follow in my car. Eleanor climbed into the ambulance, taking a seat beside her son's stretcher. David's eyes were closed again, the sedatives pulling him back into unconsciousness, but his breathing was stronger now, more regular. She took his hand once more. I'm here, David, she whispered, and I'm not going anywhere. Memorial Hospital's intensive care unit was a familiar environment for Eleanor. During her nursing career, she had spent countless hours in rooms just like the one where David now lay, monitored by machines that beeped and hummed in the reassuring rhythm of recovery. 48 hours had passed since David's rescue from the coffin beneath the Whitfield Mausoleum. The paralytic agent had metabolized from his system, and the doctors had gradually reduced the sedatives, allowing him to regain consciousness in controlled stages. Eleanor hadn't left his side except for brief moments when the medical staff needed to perform procedures. She slept in the reclining chair beside his bed, ate from trays brought by sympathetic nurses who remembered her from her years of service, and kept a constant, loving vigil. Dr. Michaels, the ICU attending physician, entered the room with David's chart in hand. Good morning, Mrs. Hartwell. How's our patient today? Eleanor smiled tiredly. His color is better, and he's been opening his eyes more frequently, though he hasn't spoken yet. Dr. Michaels checked the monitors and examined David's pupils with a penlight. Neurological responses are improving. The oxygen deprivation appears not to have caused any permanent damage, thank goodness. When do you expect him to be fully conscious? Given the cocktail of drugs in his system and the physical stress of his ordeal, I'd say within the next 12 to 24 hours. Dr. Michaels made a note in the chart. The psychological impact, however, will take longer to assess. Being buried alive, betrayed by his wife, it's a trauma beyond imagination. We'll have specialists available when he's ready, the doctor assured her. After Dr. Michaels left, Eleanor returned to her post beside David's bed. She had been reading to him from his favorite childhood book, The Call of the Wild, by Jack London. The nurses had suggested familiar voices and stories might help orient him as he emerged from sedation. As she read, she noticed his eyelids fluttering more frequently. She paused, watching as his eyes slowly opened, clearer and more focused than they had been previously. "David," she said softly. His gaze shifted to her face. Recognition dawned, followed by confusion. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry from intubation. Eleanor reached for the cup of ice chips. "Here, these will help. Just let them melt in your mouth." She placed a few chips on his lips, which he accepted gratefully. After a moment, he tried again to speak. "Mom?" His voice was a raspy whisper, barely audible above the machinery. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here." "What happened?" "You're in the hospital. You've been very ill, but you're recovering now." "Victoria? She can't hurt you anymore. She's in custody." He closed his eyes briefly, processing this information. When he opened them again, they were filled with dawning horror. "The coffin, not a nightmare?" "No, not a nightmare," Eleanor confirmed. "But it's over now. You're safe." "I was awake when they sealed it. Couldn't move, couldn't scream." "I know, sweetheart, but you survived. You're stronger than they knew." "How?" "It's a long story," Eleanor said. "One I'll tell you when you're stronger. For now, just know that a lot of people came together to find you. Father Miguel, Thomas Ryan, Dr. Vance. Even the cemetery groundskeeper noticed something wasn't right." "You found me?" David said with surprising certainty. Eleanor smiled. A mother always finds her child. David's eyes drifted closed again, the brief conversation having exhausted his limited strength, but his hand remained in hers, his grip slightly stronger than before. Dr. Vance visited later that afternoon, her professional demeanor tempered by genuine concern. She checked David's vital signs and adjusted his medication before turning to Eleanor. "The district attorney wants to meet with you tomorrow," she said in a low voice. "They're building the case against Victoria, Marcus, and the others." "I'll be there," Eleanor promised. "But I won't leave David alone. I've arranged for a private nurse, someone I trust completely," Dr. Vance assured her. "And Thomas has asked to visit. He feels responsible, in a way." Eleanor considered this. He was part of it initially. Yes, but he also helped save David's life in the end. Without his knowledge of the estate layout and the coffin mechanics, we might not have reached David in time. Dr. Vance glanced at the sleeping man. "I think forgiveness might be an important part of everyone's healing process. Send Thomas in. David's asleep now, but perhaps just being here will help Thomas process his own guilt." Thomas arrived an hour later, his face haggard with fatigue and remorse. He hesitated in the doorway, his gaze fixed on David's still form. "Come in, Thomas," Eleanor invited. "How is he?" "Improving. Mrs. Hartwell, I can't express how sorry I am. I never thought that they would actually kill him," Eleanor finished. Thomas nodded miserably. "I told myself it was just insurance fraud, that David would be dead on paper but living comfortably somewhere else with a new identity." He ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "I wanted to believe it because Victoria promised to fund my MS treatment for life. The medication costs $12.00 a month without insurance. David was providing your medication at no cost through his company." "Yes, but with the company being sold to PharmaCorp, that arrangement would end. Victoria knew exactly how to manipulate me." Thomas looked up, his eyes bleak. "That's no excuse. I should have gone to the police the moment I realized what they were really planning." "But you didn't," Eleanor said. "Instead, you helped us find him. That counts for something." "I'll testify against them," Thomas promised. "The DA has offered me immunity in exchange for my complete cooperation." "Good." Eleanor glanced at her son. "David will need people who care about him during his recovery. People he can trust. I'll be there, if he'll have me. I owe him that much and more." As Thomas was leaving, David stirred again, his eyes opening with greater clarity than before. He noticed Thomas at the foot of his bed and tensed visibly. "It's all right," Eleanor soothed. "Thomas helped rescue you." David's gaze remained fixed on his friend, a mixture of confusion and wariness in his expression. Thomas stepped forward hesitantly. "David, I'm so sorry. I was part of it at first, but when I realized what Victoria was really planning," his voice broke. "I should have stopped it sooner." David studied him for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. Not forgiveness, not yet, but acknowledgement. It was the beginning. After Thomas left, David turned to his mother. "The truth," he rasped. "All of it." Eleanor recognized the determination in his eyes, the same stubborn resolve he'd shown as a child, insisting on climbing to the highest branches of the backyard oak tree. She poured him a small cup of water, helping him sip through a straw before beginning. "Victoria was planning to kill you and take control of your company," she said directly, knowing he deserved honesty rather than protection. "She and Marcus gave you a paralytic agent that simulated death. Dr. Vance was coerced into signing the death certificate under threat to her daughter." David closed his eyes briefly. "Jake?" he asked, naming his business partner. "Involved from the beginning. He and Victoria had been working together for over a year, plotting to sell your company to PharmaCorp once you were out of the way. Told him, never sell, not to them." "I know. Your principles were an obstacle to their greed." Eleanor hesitated. "Victoria and James Kavanaugh were also involved. Knew about them. Found out. Week before." This was news to Eleanor. "You knew Victoria was having an affair with Kavanaugh?" He nodded slightly. "Confronted her. She denied. But I had proof." Each sentence seemed to drain his energy, but he pressed on. "Went to Father Miguel. To confess." "Confess what, David?" "Thoughts of divorce. Breaking sacred vows." A hint of his former sardonic humor glimmered in his eyes. "Ironic, no? Feeling guilty?" While she plotted murder, Eleanor stroked his hand. "You always did have the most tender conscience in the family. The company. Lupus treatment. Can't let them have it." "They won't," Eleanor assured him. "The sale has been halted pending investigation. And Victoria, Marcus, Jake, and Kavanaugh are all facing multiple felony charges." Relief washed over David's face. "Mom, I'm sorry. Should have believed you. About Victoria. You loved her," she said simply. "Love makes us vulnerable to deception." "No excuse," David insisted weakly. "You tried to warn me. I chose. Her lies. That's in the past now," Eleanor said. David's eyes began to drift closed again, the conversation having depleted his limited reserves. But before succumbing to sleep, he murmured, "Stay?" Eleanor smiled. "Always." The next morning, Rosa Martinez arrived at the hospital with the district attorney, Elaine Winters. They spoke with Eleanor in a small conference room while Dr. Vance's trusted private nurse sat with David. "Mrs. Hartwell, I want to thank you for your extraordinary efforts," D.A. Winters began. She was a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, with intelligent eyes. "Without your persistence, this conspiracy might never have been uncovered." "I only did what any mother would do," Eleanor demurred. "I've been a prosecutor for 22 years, Winters replied with a slight smile. "I can assure you, what you did was far from ordinary." Rosa placed a folder on the table. "We've compiled the evidence against Victoria, Marcus, Jake Morrison, and James Kavanaugh. It's substantial. The charges include conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, insurance fraud, securities fraud, false imprisonment, and coercion of medical personnel," Winters detailed. "What about David's company?" Eleanor asked. "The SEC has frozen all transactions pending investigation," Winters explained. "PharmaCorp has withdrawn their purchase offer in light of the criminal charges. The company remains under the control of its board of directors until David is able to resume leadership or appoint new management." Eleanor nodded, satisfied. "And Victoria's previous husband? I have reason to believe she may have done this before." "We're already investigating that angle," Rosa confirmed. "The body is being exhumed for toxicology testing. There's one more thing you should know," Winters added. "Victoria has been attempting to frame you as the mastermind behind the entire plot." "Me? How exactly does she explain that?" "She claims you were bitter about being excluded from David's life, and conspired with Thomas and Dr. Vance to kidnap David and fake his imprisonment, planning to accuse her of attempted murder to get revenge." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Eleanor found herself laughing softly. "That's creative. I'll give her that." "It's desperate," Rosa corrected. "Will David need to testify?" Eleanor asked, her maternal concern evident. "Eventually, yes," Winters acknowledged. "But not until he's medically cleared. His testimony will be crucial. He was conscious when they sedated him and can identify his captors. He's getting stronger each day, but the psychological trauma, that will take longer to heal. We'll proceed at his pace," Winters promised. When Eleanor returned to David's room, she found him sitting up slightly, the head of his bed elevated. The private nurse was helping him with a cup of broth, which he sipped slowly but with determination. "Look who's feeling better," Eleanor said. David attempted a smile. Small steps. The nurse excused herself, leaving mother and son alone. Eleanor settled into her familiar chair, noticing the improved color in David's face and the greater clarity in his eyes. "The district attorney was here," she informed him. "They're building a strong case against Victoria and the others." David nodded. "Good." He hesitated, then asked, "Did they say how long?" Eleanor understood he was asking about the punishment. If convicted on all counts, they're facing decades in prison. A complex emotion crossed David's face. Not satisfaction. Exactly. but a kind of grim resolution. She would have let me die, slowly, awake. Yes, Eleanor acknowledged. I chose her, over you, over everyone who truly cared. You weren't the first person to be deceived by someone they loved, Eleanor reminded him. 3 years, David said, regret heavy in his voice. Not wasted. You learned something valuable, albeit painfully, and now you have a second chance, at life, at relationships, at everything. I don't deserve your forgiveness. Not yet. Forgiveness isn't about deserving, David. It's about healing, for both the forgiver and the forgiven. Besides, there will be plenty of time for you to make it up to me once you're well. This says, how? Weekly dinners, to start, and I expect to be consulted on all major life decisions going forward, she teased gently. Deal, he whispered. Over the next week, David's recovery progressed steadily. The physical effects of his ordeal, dehydration, muscle weakness, respiratory issues, responded well to treatment. He graduated from broth to solid foods, from lying flat to sitting up, from whispered words to longer conversations. The psychological healing would take longer. Nightmares plagued his sleep, terrifying dreams of being trapped, unable to move or call for help as his air slowly ran out. During one particularly severe episode, he woke screaming, convinced he was still in the coffin. Eleanor had been dozing in the chair beside him but snapped awake instantly. David, you're safe, she soothed, taking his flailing hands in hers. You're in the hospital. Look at me, sweetheart. Focus on my face. Gradually, reality reasserted itself. David's panicked breathing slowed, his wild eyes focusing on his mother's familiar features. It felt so real. He gasped. I know. Eleanor stroked his hair as she had when he was a child, frightened by thunder. But it wasn't. The hospital had assigned a trauma psychologist, Dr. Levine, who visited David daily. Initially reluctant to discuss his experience, David gradually opened up, describing not only the terror of his entombment, but also the slow realization over the past months that his marriage had been built on deception. I think I knew, on some level, he admitted during one session that Eleanor had been invited to join. There were inconsistencies in her stories, unexplained absences, phone calls she would take in another room. When did you first suspect her affair with Kavanaugh? Dr. Levine asked. About 6 months ago, but I had concrete proof only recently. Bank statements showing joint purchases, hotel receipts, photographs from a private investigator I hired. David glanced at his mother. I was going to call you the day after they drugged me. I wanted to apologize, to tell you you'd been right all along. You were planning to divorce her? Dr. Levine inquired. David nodded. I had met with an attorney secretly. The papers were being drawn up. A bitter smile twisted his lips. Victoria must have found out somehow. She accelerated her plans. And your company? The psychologist prompted. Was that also a point of contention? Constantly. Victoria wanted me to sell to PharmaCorp. The offer was substantial, over $200 million. But I knew what they would do with the lupus treatment I developed. David's voice strengthened with conviction. They would price it at whatever the market would bear, putting it out of reach for most patients. I developed that drug because my college roommate died of complications from lupus. It was never about profit. Eleanor listened with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Her son's principles had nearly cost him his life, yet they were what made him the man she had raised him to be. After 10 days in the hospital, David was stable enough to be moved to a private rehabilitation facility specializing in trauma recovery. The morning of the transfer, Father Miguel visited, bringing a small potted plant for David's new room. It's called a peace lily, the priest explained. They're remarkably resilient, can survive even when neglected for periods of time. David accepted the plant with a nod of thanks. Appropriate symbolism, Father. How are you feeling about the move? Ready, David replied. Hospitals have too many echoes of the coffin. Eleanor, who had been packing David's few personal items, looked up sharply. It was the first time he had directly referenced the coffin without prompting from Dr. Levine. The rehabilitation center is more like a comfortable hotel, she assured him, with gardens and sunshine. And security, Father Miguel added. Detective Martinez has arranged for a protective detail, just as a precaution. David nodded appreciation. Though Victoria and her co-conspirators remained in custody, their resources were substantial. No one was taking chances with David's safety. As they prepared for the transfer, Dr. Vance appeared in the doorway. She had visited several times during David's recovery, each interaction initially tense but gradually easing as David came to understand the coercion she had faced. I wanted to see you before you left, she said, and to give you this. She handed David a folder. It's a complete report on the drugs they used, their effects, and the expected recovery timeline. I thought it might help to understand the medical aspects of what happened. David accepted the folder. Thank you, Patricia, for everything. I should have found a way to warn you. To stop them. They threatened your daughter, David reminded her. As Dr. Vance left, David turned to his mother. She's carrying too much guilt, as are you, Eleanor observed, for cutting me out of your life. I believed Victoria's lies because they played into my own insecurities, that I wasn't independent enough, that I was too tied to my mother's apron strings. Victoria was skilled at that, Eleanor agreed. And what did she use against you? David asked. Eleanor smiled sadly. The simplest leverage of all, my love for you. She knew I wouldn't force my way into your life if I thought it would cause you pain. So she made sure you believed that was exactly what I was doing. I'm sorry, Mom, so sorry. I know, sweetheart. Eleanor squeezed his hand. But as I keep telling you, we have a second chance now. Let's not waste it on regrets. The ambulance transfer to Lakeside Rehabilitation Center went smoothly. David's new room was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking gardens that were still vibrant despite the approaching autumn. Eleanor helped him settle in, arranging Father Miguel's peace lily on the windowsill where it would catch the morning sun. There, she said with satisfaction. Already feels less institutional. David was able to sit in a chair now, though the effort tired him quickly. He watched his mother's efficient movements with a contemplative expression. You don't have to stay, you know. I'm in good hands here. Are you trying to get rid of me, David Hartwell? Never. But you've been sleeping in hospital chairs for nearly 2 weeks. You need proper rest. I'm fine. Mom. His voice held a gentle insistence. Go home. Sleep in your own bed. Take a long shower. Come back tomorrow refreshed. Eleanor hesitated, torn between her desire to remain at his side and the recognition that he was right. Promise you'll call if you need anything? Anything at all? I promise. His expression softened. Finally, she relented. All right, but I'll be back first thing in the morning. I'll be here, he assured her with gentle humor. As Eleanor drove to her apartment that evening, the events of the past 2 weeks played through her mind like scenes from a surreal film. From being blocked at the funeral to discovering the conspiracy, from finding David in that horrific coffin to watching him take his first tentative steps toward recovery, it was almost too much to process. Her apartment felt strange after so much time away, slightly musty, eerily quiet, untouched by the drama that had consumed her life. She moved through the familiar rooms, opening windows to let in fresh air, sorting through accumulated mail, restoring normalcy one small action at a time. In her bedroom, she found the velvet box containing David's baby teeth still in her handbag where she had placed it the morning of the funeral. Such a small thing to have carried, yet it had been her talisman, her connection to the son she feared she had lost forever. She set the box on her nightstand and prepared for bed, the luxury of a hot shower and clean sheets, almost overwhelming after nights spent in hospital chairs. As she drifted toward sleep, her phone chimed with a text message. It was from David. Good night, Mom. Thank you for finding me in the darkness. She replied simply, always. Sweet dreams, my son. 3 months later, Eleanor sat in the witness box of courtroom 7B, her posture straight despite her 72 years, her gaze steady as she faced Victoria Hartwell across the crowded room. The trial of Victoria, Marcus, Jake Morrison, and James Kavanaugh had become a media sensation, dubbed the Coffin Conspiracy, by press outlets hungry for the dramatic details. Every day, the courtroom was packed with journalists, legal observers, and morbidly curious members of the public. Victoria, still beautiful despite 3 months in county detention, maintained her facade of injured innocence. She sat beside her high-priced defense attorney in a modest navy suit, her hair pulled back in a simple style, jewelry limited to small pearl earrings, a carefully constructed image of respectability. Mrs. Hartwell, the prosecutor, Elaine Winters, began. Please tell the court about your relationship with your son prior to the events of September 15th. Eleanor took a steadying breath. David and I had been estranged for approximately 3 years. The estrangement began shortly after I attempted to warn him about his wife's infidelity. Objection, Victoria's attorney rose. Hearsay and prejudicial. Your Honor, this establishes the pattern of behavior that led to the conspiracy, Winters countered. The judge considered it briefly. I'll allow it, but keep it relevant to the charges, Ms. Winters. Winters nodded and turned back to Eleanor. What happened when you tried to attend your son's funeral? I was blocked from entering the cathedral by security guards. Marcus Whitfield informed me that Victoria had requested I be kept out, claiming there was a restraining order against me. Eleanor's voice remained steady. There was never any such order. And what did you observe that day that aroused your suspicions? Eleanor recounted the details. The 2-light coffin, the precise time of death, Marcus's overheard phone conversation about sedatives and consciousness, Jake Morrison's call about the company sale. As a nurse with over 40 years of experience, what did these observations suggest to you? That my son might not actually be dead, Eleanor replied simply. That he might have been drugged to simulate death for some purpose related to his company and life insurance. What actions did you take based on these suspicions? Eleanor detailed her investigation, consulting Father Miguel, reviewing the medical records, speaking with Dr. Vance, discovering the Whitfield Mausoleum's secret chamber. And what did you find when you entered the Whitfield estate? Objection. Victoria's attorney stood again. Mrs. W. Hartwell was trespassing on private property. She was invited onto the property by Ms. Whitfield herself, Winters countered, as established by earlier testimony and security footage. Overruled, the judge decided. The witness may answer. Eleanor continued, describing her confrontation with Victoria and Kavanaugh, the revelation of their plan, and Victoria's attempt to inject her with the same paralytic agent used on David. In your own words, Mrs. Hartwell, why do you believe the defendants took these actions against your son? For money and control. And based on your conversation with Victoria Whitfield in the study, did she express any remorse for her actions? None whatsoever, Eleanor replied. In fact, she seemed proud of her plan, calling it effective even as she prepared to kill me as well. Victoria's composure slipped momentarily, a flash of fury crossing her perfect features before she masked it again with an expression of wounded disbelief. No further questions, Your Honor. Victoria's attorney approached the witness stand, his expensive suit and carefully cultivated demeanor designed to intimidate. Mrs. Hartwell, isn't it true that you resented your daughter-in-law for years before these alleged events? I was concerned about her influence on my son, yes. Concerned, the attorney repeated skeptically, or jealous that she had replaced you as the primary woman in your son's life. Objection, Winters called. Argumentative. Sustained, the judge agreed. The defense attorney tried a different approach. Mrs. Hartwell, you claim to have overheard a conversation between Marcus Whitfield and an unknown party about sedatives in consciousness. Isn't it possible you misheard or misinterpreted what was said? No, Eleanor replied firmly. I heard him clearly say, the sedative worked perfectly. No one will ever know he was conscious during the heart attack, and this remarkable statement just happened to be made within your hearing, at precisely the moment you were developing suspicions. I can't speak to Mr. Whitfield's timing or lack of discretion, Eleanor said evenly. I can only report what I heard. Mrs. Hartwell, by your own admission, you were not close to your son for the 3 years preceding these events. How can you claim to know his wishes regarding his company or his marriage? David and I were estranged because Victoria deliberately drove a wedge between us. But I knew my son's character. He built his company with the explicit mission of making vital medications accessible to those who needed them most. This is documented in the company's founding charter and mission statement. So you presume to know what your adult son would or would not have wanted, despite having no contact with him for years. I know what kind of man I raised, Eleanor replied. Mrs. Hartwell, isn't it possible that this entire scenario, the alleged kidnapping, the coffin, all of it, was staged by you and your accomplices to frame my client, perhaps out of revenge for being excluded from your son's life? That would require me to have drugged my own son, built a specialized coffin with an oxygen supply system, somehow gained access to the Whitfield Mausoleum without anyone's knowledge, and then orchestrated a rescue involving multiple witnesses, including law enforcement. She raised an eyebrow slightly, all while being a 72-year-old woman with arthritis and limited resources. The defense attorney, recognizing he was making little headway, concluded his cross-examination shortly thereafter. The following day, David himself took the stand. Though visibly tense, he spoke with clarity and conviction about the events leading to his entombment. I had discovered Victoria's affair with James Kavanaugh approximately 2 weeks before my supposed death, he testified. I had hired a private investigator after noticing discrepancies in her stories and unexplained charges on our credit cards. What did you intend to do with this information? Winters asked. I had consulted an attorney about divorce proceedings, David replied. The papers were being prepared when this happened. Please tell the court in your own words what occurred on the night of September 13th. Victoria brought me a glass of wine after dinner. It tasted slightly bitter, but I didn't think much of it until I began to feel strange, dizzy, then numb. I tried to stand, to call for help, but my limbs wouldn't respond. He paused, visibly gathering himself before continuing. Victoria watched me collapse. She didn't call 911. Instead, she called someone. I later learned it was her brother Marcus, and said, "It's working. He can't move." The courtroom was utterly silent, every person hanging on his words. I could hear and see everything, but I couldn't move or speak. My breathing slowed to almost nothing. I felt cold, like my body was shutting down. David swallowed hard. Marcus arrived about 20 minutes later with Dr. Vance. Victoria told her I'd had a heart attack, but Dr. Vance seemed suspicious. That's when Marcus took her aside and showed her something on his phone that made her go pale. What happened next? They declared me dead. I heard Dr. Vance saying the time, 3 a.m., and Victoria repeated it several times, like she was memorizing it. David's voice grew hoarser. Then they moved me to what I later learned was the coffin. Before they closed it, Victoria leaned down and whispered, "Goodbye, darling. Thanks for the company." Victoria's attorney jumped to his feet. "Objection. This is theatrical hearsay that cannot be verified. Your Honor, this is the victim's direct testimony about what he experienced." Winters countered. "Overruled," the judge decided. "The witness may continue." David described the horror of being sealed in the coffin, aware but unable to move or call for help, not knowing if anyone would discover the truth before his air ran out. "The worst part," he concluded, "was knowing that my wife, someone I had loved and trusted, had done this to me deliberately, that she had planned my slow, conscious death for money." During cross-examination, Victoria's attorney attempted to suggest that David had been hallucinating due to the drugs in his system, that he couldn't be certain of what he'd heard or seen. "Mr. Hartwell, isn't it possible that in your compromised state, you misinterpreted innocent actions and statements? The paralytic agent affects motor function, not cognition. My mind was clear. I knew exactly what was happening to me and who was responsible." The defense's strategy became increasingly desperate as the trial progressed. They suggested alternate theories, attacked the credibility of witnesses, and even attempted to paint Eleanor as a manipulative mother who had orchestrated the entire scenario to regain control of her son. None of it was effective. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas's emails and testimony, Dr. Vance's medical documentation, the body camera footage from Rosa Martinez and the others, the specialized coffin itself with its countdown timer and limited air supply, and most damningly, Victoria's own words captured on Eleanor's body camera as she prepared to inject her with the paralytic agent. After 3 weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning with their verdict. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, how do you find?" The judge asked the jury forewoman. "We find the defendant, Victoria Hartwell, guilty." Similar verdicts followed for Marcus, Jake Morrison, and James Kavanaugh. Additional guilty verdicts were returned for insurance fraud, securities fraud, false imprisonment, and witness intimidation. As the courtroom erupted in murmurs and exclamations, Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. She turned toward Eleanor and David, her beautiful face contorted with hatred. "He never loved you," she shrieked as court officers moved to restrain her. "You ruined everything. Everything." Eleanor met her gaze calmly. "No, Victoria, you did that yourself." The sentencing hearing was held 2 weeks later. Victoria received life imprisonment without possibility of parole for 50 years. Marcus, Morrison, and Kavanaugh received sentences ranging from 30 to 45 years. As they left the courthouse after the sentencing, David placed a protective arm around his mother's shoulders. "It's over," he said quietly. "Finally over." Eleanor nodded, feeling a weight lift from her heart. Justice doesn't erase the trauma, but it helps with healing. "Speaking of healing," David said as they walked toward the parking lot, "I've been thinking about the company." "Oh?" "I'm restructuring it as a non-profit. The lupus treatment will be priced at cost, plus a small margin to fund research into other autoimmune diseases." A determined light entered his eyes. "What Victoria and the others tried to steal will instead become a legacy that helps thousands." "That sounds exactly like something my son would do." 6 months after the trial concluded, Eleanor stood in the kitchen of a small coastal cottage, preparing tea while listening to the sound of waves breaking on the shore beyond the dunes. The cottage belonged to David, purchased after he sold his former home, unable to live in the space he had shared with Victoria. David entered through the back door, windblown from his morning walk on the beach. At his side trotted a golden retriever named Chance, a rescue dog he had adopted shortly after moving to the coast. "Good walk?" Eleanor asked. "The best," David replied. Chance made a friend, a border collie about half his size who ran circles around him. Eleanor smiled, noting how much stronger her son looked these days. The physical trauma had healed completely, and while occasional nightmares still disturbed his sleep, they were becoming less frequent. They carried their tea to the sunroom overlooking the ocean, settling into comfortable chairs. Chance flopped at David's feet with a contented sigh. "I received a letter from Thomas yesterday," David mentioned. "The clinical trial for the new MS treatment is showing promising results." "That's wonderful news," Eleanor replied. David nodded. "He's been invaluable at the foundation. His engineering background combined with his personal experience as a patient gives him a unique perspective." After the trial, David had offered Thomas a position at the newly formed Hartwell Foundation for Autoimmune Research. It had been both an act of forgiveness and a practical decision. Thomas's skills and knowledge were assets worth retaining. And Dr. Vance? Eleanor inquired. She's accepted the position heading our clinical research department, David confirmed. Her daughter Emily is finishing medical school this spring. Apparently, she's interested in rheumatology. Life has a way of creating meaningful connections, doesn't it? Even through difficult circumstances. Speaking of connections, David said, I have something for you. He handed her a small velvet box, not the one containing his baby teeth, but similar in size and appearance. Eleanor opened it to find a delicate silver pendant in the shape of a compass rose. It's beautiful, she murmured. I had it made specially, David explained. The compass rose symbolizes finding one's way home, finding true north. His voice grew softer. You were my true north, Mom. Even when I was lost, you never wavered. Thank you, David. I'll treasure it always. He helped her fasten the necklace, then settled back in his chair. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching sunlight dance on the waves. I've been thinking, David said eventually, about what you said during the trial, that you know what kind of man you raised. Eleanor glanced at him inquiringly. You were right, he continued. Despite everything, the betrayal, the trauma, I've tried to let those experiences shape me without defining me, to hold on to the values you instilled. A small smile touched his lips. Even in that coffin, in my darkest moment, I found myself thinking, what would Mom do? She wouldn't give up. She would keep fighting. And you did. You survived, David, not just physically, but in every way that matters. Because you found me, he said. When everyone else believed I was gone, you knew better. A mother's intuition, you called it. That, and 40 years of nursing experience, Eleanor added with a soft laugh. I knew what a body should weigh. Those pallbearers had it too easy. Do you ever think about her? About Victoria? Sometimes. Not with anger anymore. Mostly with a kind of bewilderment. How someone could appear so beautiful on the outside while harboring such darkness within. I've made peace with it, David said after a moment. Not with her. I don't think I'll ever forgive what she did, but with my own role in the situation. I ignored warning signs. I chose to believe what was comfortable rather than what was true. He looked directly at Eleanor. I won't make that mistake again. None of us is perfect, David. We all have blind spots, especially when it comes to those we love. Eleanor touched her new pendant. The important thing is learning to recognize when we've lost our way and finding our true north again. I was thinking we might invite Father Miguel and the Martinezes for dinner next weekend, David suggested, to thank them properly for everything they did. That's a lovely idea, Eleanor agreed. I'll make my famous pot roast. The one with the red wine and rosemary? The very same. Eleanor smiled at his enthusiasm. Some traditions are worth preserving. As they continued chatting, making plans for the dinner in the coming weeks, Eleanor felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over her. The nightmare they had endured had nearly cost David his life, and had certainly changed both of them forever. But from that darkness had emerged a renewed relationship, stronger and deeper than before. Now, watching her son pet his rescue dog while discussing dinner plans with genuine enthusiasm, Eleanor silently thanked whatever forces had guided her on that terrible day at the funeral. Her nursing experience, her maternal instinct, her refusal to accept what seemed obvious, all had converged to reveal a truth that would otherwise have remained buried. If this story of a mother's incredible intuition saving her son from a terrible fate touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We bring you compelling true stories that showcase the resilience of the human spirit and the power of love to overcome even the darkest circumstances. Drop a comment below sharing a time when your intuition helped you or someone you love avoid danger. Your experiences might help others learn to trust their inner voice when something doesn't seem right. Eleanor Hartwell continues to live near her son, spending several days each week at his coastal cottage. She has become an advocate for families of crime victims, speaking at conferences about the importance of persistence when something doesn't feel right. David Hartwell's Hartwell Foundation for Autoimmune Research has become a leading nonprofit in the field, providing affordable medications to thousands of patients who would otherwise be unable to afford treatment. Victoria Hartwell remains in prison, her appeals having been denied at every level. Investigation into the death of her first husband confirmed Eleanor's suspicions. He too had been murdered using similar methods. As for Thomas Ryan, Dr. Vance, Father Miguel, and the Martinezes, they remain close friends with Eleanor and David, bound by the extraordinary experience they shared. Old Pete, the cemetery groundskeeper whose observation about the hollow-sounding coffin provided a crucial early clue, was hired as the caretaker for the Hartwell Foundation's memorial garden.